Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Kaf Vav in Kiddushin. We are at the very top of Kaf Vav Amud Aleph at the Mishnah. So we're going to have some Rashi today. We're going to have some Tosos today. We're going to have some Moshe today. We'll see. And let's see, we're going to get started right now. So let's take a look. We're going to have some wonderful things. And here we go. Okay, 1 second, share my screen. It helps to share the screen. And here we go. So again, we have been learning the different ways of making acquisitions. We've spent the first almost 4 weeks of learning Maseches Kiddushin, learning the different kinds of acquisitions. We learned acquisitions in connection with getting married. We learned acquisitions in connection with a non-Jewish slave, with a Jewish slave. We learned acquisitions in connection with a non-Jewish slave. We learned about acquisitions in connection with animals. That's what we did yesterday. And now we look at other kinds of property. So as we begin on the top, very top line, Mishnah, and on Kavav Amud Aleph, Nuschasim Sheyesh Lahem Machrayas. So what in the world are Nechasim Sheyesh Lahem Machrayas? So the simple understanding is it's just, we're talking about real property. Now, why is it called Nechasim Sheyesh Lahem Machrayas? What does that mean? It means, Nechasim, property, Sheyesh Lahem Machrayas, that has some sense of responsibility. What does that mean? It means the following. When we borrow money, right, it's going to be based on the fact that there's something to collect against. And so we say nechasim sheyesh lahem machrayas because a lender knows that that property will continue to exist. And if you record a mortgage against it, indeed, these rules are still existent today. If you record a mortgage against it and the person sells it from under you, you know what? You still get to collect from the land because you have a recorded mortgage. And in Judaism, it was assumed that all property transactions were public, and therefore, if you had a property transaction, even if the mortgage, all mortgages were essentially, all written loans were considered public. And so as a result, if you had a written loan with the owner of a piece of property, you had a mortgage on that property. You held a mortgage right into that property. And so that property and any other properties that the person owned at the time that he borrowed the money from you, so all of that is usable to collect. And so that's what we mean by nechasim sheyesh lahem machrayas, because you have the ability to collect from it. And what is the story with them? Nignin b'kesef u'b'shtar u'b'chazaka. There are 3 different ways of making an acquisition that are special for property, and they are kesef, shtar, and chazaka. Kesef is using money to buy it. Shtar is a contract. We'll see each of these in the Gemara. And chazaka means something. So what does it mean? Let's take a look. B'chazaka, Rashi, second narrow line in Rashi. So b'chazaka, rafak be'porta. You plow a little bit. You plow a some fragment of the or portion of the location. Dayish amitzri, or the dayish could either be walk or is some kind of taking some action on the land around the border. Na'al, or you can lock the property. Paretz kolshu, or you can open the property by some amount. So any of these actions are considered chazaka. Chazaka, in the end, seems to be you take an action that only an owner would take with respect to the property. Mm-hmm. And so that shows that you are the one that is holding the property. You're the one that owns the property. Okay, now what about she'ein lahem machrayas? What about property that doesn't have? So let's what about property that doesn't have achrayas, which means anything that's movable? Because after all, right? If I have this phone, we say that possession is 9/10 of the law, but the point is that I can have the phone and it could be in my pocket and you'll never even know that I have it. So the point is that when it comes to movable property, it's much easier to keep it out of the eye and out of the possible collection process. And that's why it's considered nechasim she'ein lahem achrayas. So, and how do they get acquired? Niknin im nechasim sheyesh. I'm sorry. So, ein niknin ela b'mashicha. They are acquired only through mashicha. Mashicha is a process of drawing, of pulling it, of dragging it on some level, and one can include in mashicha some aspect of lifting it as well, potentially. So nechasim she'ein lahem achrayas, things that don't, again, movable property. Nignim in nechasim sheyesh lahem achrayas. They also have the ability to be acquired with real property, meaning that if I buy a piece of land and on it is this phone, I get the phone too, assuming that the person who owned the phone is trying to sell me the phone with the land. And possibly we'll see that the discussion that will carry over to tomorrow, maybe even the property doesn't have the movable property, maybe it doesn't even have to be on the real property in order to be acquired with the real property. That's going to be the question that we will conclude today with. So bekesef uvishtar uvechazaka. So again, just as the real property can be acquired with kesef, shtar, and chazaka, so too the movable property that is being acquired together with it can also be acquired with it. Let's take a look in Rashi. Niknin im nechasim. It's the next Rashi. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down in the narrow lines. Im machar metaltalim im karka. If you sell movable property with land, kevan shekana lokech as a karka, since the since the buyer has acquired the land with one of these 3 methods of acquisition, they can acquire the movable property together with it. Okay, and movable property, right, has the ability to bring with it real property in order to take an oath. Well, what does that mean? So let's take a look. Rashi helps us again. So let's take a look at Rashi Zokakin. Okay, so Zokakin, that it comes with it. Nechasim halalu. These properties she'ein lahem achrayas, that are movable, the kamairi bahu that we're talking about, tana es hanechasim sheyesh lahen achrayas. So that we can then learn about that for the nechasim that do have achrayas, meaning real property. And so what's the concept? What's going on here? So Rashi now continues and explains, in general, we say you do not swear with respect to property. Now, if I were to tell you, listen, Stan, I gave you my phone and my pen for you to watch. Can you say, no, you didn't. You gave me your pen to watch, not your phone. Well, you know what? That is a moda b'mikza's case, and you now need to swear that was all I gave you and nothing else. But if I tell you, listen, I gave you 2 pieces of land to watch, and you say, no, you didn't. You gave me 1 piece of land to watch. You do not need to swear. So that is the general rule. Now, what happens? And then now that we got afal got the Einish ban al karkos levadan, even though we say you do not swear when it comes to land on its own, kedinafgalam b'shvuas, as we learned in Masechah Shvuas, hecha detanu kelim v'karkos. If I make a claim that says, listen, you had the following vessel, you had my pen along with the piece of property, and let's say I say 2 pens and a piece of property, and now you need to swear with respect to the pens, because you say, no, I only was watching 1 pen of yours. Well, now that I have, and you are denying the property as being something that I gave you to watch, so now that you are denying with respect to movable properties and you're having to swear with respect to movable properties, we're going to make you swear with respect to the land as well. So the metaltalin brings along the land, land, so that you have to swear. So hai zokikin anechasim shkai, and the word zokikin applies to the word nechasim. She'ein lehem achrayas v'lav abeistin. It's not going on the beistin; it's going on the property itself. Okay. So
Question.
yes.
So the mission is clearly saying that it is real estate that secures loans and not movable property.
Well, just to be clear, it does not define nechasim sheyesh lehem hamakarias. We have defined it as saying it means land.
Okay, so
But
that's Chazal's interpretation. But at some point during the time of the Gaonim, they allowed movable property to be security for loans.
yes, well, you even I don't know exactly when the Torah references movable property as security loans. That's the definition of collateral.
Right.
And collateral is usually property that is given to the lender to hold as a security for the loan. But it has separate rules and
Yeah.
is not considered and is not that it would not we would not apply all of these rules to property that could be collateral. That is not what we're talking about.
Yeah. So that was actually my question about how the change over time to classify movable property more like real estate would have changed all these other things. And my impression is that it probably didn't.
Yeah, I don't think it did because
Okay.
again, the underlying principle here is sort of how one makes an acquisition, and we're going to come to a very key point that we're going to see in the fourth parak of Bava Metzia, Parak Azav, that is going to be talking about why our transactions are the way they are. Namely, why it is that we say that you need Mashiach, you need to have sort of some kind of taking of property in order for property to be sold. So we're going to see that in a moment, but now we're going to spend much of the day going through all of the different transactions that we mentioned and what their source is. So we begin with the acquisitions of real property, the kesef. And we said kesef, star, and chazaka. We're going to go through each of them. First, kesef. Kesef, minolan. How do I know? So amr chizki, amr kra, sadas bekesef yiknu. Well, it says in Yirmiyahu that they are going to acquire fields with money. So so Tosos asked the question immediately. One second. If we take a look at the second Tosos on Kavav Manal, Amar Krasos Bekesef Yiknu. Why are you citing a pasuk in Yirmiyahu? Tosos asks implicitly, because what should we cite? We should cite the Kinyan of Stay Ephron that Abraham makes in order to buy a burial plot in Chayesara, Parshas Chayesara, and to buy a burial plot for his wife Sarah after she passes away. So hadalo icy mikra to kasiv gabe Ephron, that which we didn't cite, and so he goes directly to the answer of that question. The fact that we didn't cite the pasuk with respect to Ephron, mishum de dilma hani mili minachri. Maybe there's a different rule when you buy something from a non-Jew. So it could be that a purchase from a non-Jew has to be with money, but Shekol Kinyano Bekesef, because non-Jews only have money as a mechanism of acquisition, and maybe they don't have other mechanisms of acquisition. So that was why the Tosfos notes that we don't start with the question of why don't we cite the purchase of Abraham, the Abraham's purchase of Sedei Ephron. All right,
So
the
that's treating Abraham again, as is sometimes done by Chazal, as not being Jewish.
No. Abraham it would be Jewish. It's the seller that's not Jewish.
In Sanhedrin, Abraham is treated as a non-Jew.
Okay. Well, here, you're right that it could. You know what? That interpretation.
That's another conversation. Okay.
No. That interpretation would make sense, but the interesting thing is that here it says it doesn't say Hani Mili bin Nachri, but min Nachri, which implies that it's the question of whether or not a transaction is valid focuses on the seller. And so here we're saying that Ephron is definitely not Jewish. That we don't get to the question of whether Abraham is Jewish, because what matters is that the seller
is the seller, right?
Okay. The Ema ad Ikashtar. How do I know that pasuk in Yirmiyahu only refers to money? Because you know what? The end of that pasuk, or actually the next words of that pasuk are that you should record it in a document and sign it. So that suggests that maybe you need both money and a contract. So how do I know that that verse is only telling you about only telling us that you need money and that money is sufficient? Well, the Gemara answers, Iksiv yiknu levasof. Well, listen, where did it say? It says sados bekesef yiknu. If the word yiknu had been written at the very end, so it would say sados bekesef, the kasub besefer v'chasum yiknu, right? That you have the kinyan all the way at the end after referencing also the contract. Well, then kidduka amrat, then it'll be true, like you said. But hashta diksiv yiknu miikara. It says yiknu immediately after the reference to the kesef. So that suggests kesef kani, that the kesef alone makes the acquisition. Shtar ra'aya ba'almahu. And the shtar is just a piece of evidence, and it is not actually the mechanism of acquisition. So Amar Rav, lo shanu el v'makom she'ein kosven es a shtar. Now, when we say that money is sufficient, Rav qualifies it and says that that is only true in places where we don't have a custom of writing a contract. If every place there's a system of writing a contract, well, then we're going to have that. And in fact, in the United States, we have a general rule that you can't buy real estate without a written contract. And so actually, what? You knew that?
Thank God.
Yes, thank God. Okay. So the point is that thank God, certainly for my wife, who's a real estate lawyer. So, so as a result, we would say that in a place like the United States, you need to also have a document about the makom shekosven es a shtar, in a place where they do have that kind of document request. Lo kana, just the money passing hands is not enough. The parish, however, even in a place where, again, I don't know, we're not talking about now a place where there's an actual rule like the United States, but if you have a place where the custom is that you have to have a written document, if the buyer says explicitly that they would like to use money to make the acquisition, parish, that is sufficient, and it can be a valid transaction. So take a look in Rashi. In parish, it's almost smack in the middle of the narrow lines in Rashi. Im ritzoni yikna li kasbi o yikna shtari. If he's explicit that he says that if I want, I should be able to buy with my kesef or buy with a contract, well, then that stipulation will take effect. And how do I know that that'll take effect? Because we have a story. Kihad to Rav Idi bar Avin. There was a fellow, Rav Idi bar Avin, that what would he do? Kizavin Ara Amar, whenever he bought land, he would say, I be'ina b'kasba ikne. I be'ina b'shtara ikne. If I want to be able to acquire it with money. If I want to be able to acquire it with a document. And what would he do? He would then immediately give the money. And what would this allow him to do? So let's take a look in Rashi. Lahachi Amar Tarvaihu. Here's the purpose for him saying the both ideas. Shiahehu Yachol Laxor Bo. He wants to be able to retract. However, Abal Hamocher Lo Yachzor Bo. Lo Yachzor. He doesn't want the seller to be able to retract. So this is what we do. Now, obviously, the seller can retract as long as the buyer hasn't said the magic words, but we'll say the following. As we're about to explain, so if the seller wants to come back and retract, Yomerlo, then the buyer will have the ability, because he said, I want to be able to use either the money or a contract. He could say to the seller, I want my money to acquire the property, and my money I've already given you. So now I've already acquired the property. Now, if the buyer wants to retract, so he has already given him the money, but he could say, Yomerlo, Aini Rotsa Shihei Kaspi Kona. I don't want my money to be the acquisition mechanism. Achia Boashtar. I want the contract to be the mechanism. And therefore, since the contract hasn't happened yet, you haven't given me the written document. As a result, I want to be able to go back. And as long as I haven't received the contract, the written document, I will be able to undo the matter. And so that there we see now how this mechanism was a very big advantage to Ravidi Bar Avin. He would give the money and then say, I want the flexibility to either say that the money's going to work or to say, you know what, I need a written contract. And it would allow him to undo what he had done. So, right? So, and now the Gemara explains it. So, Glenn, along the lines of what Rashi was saying, but Rashi did it so nicely, I wanted to go with Rashi first. So, if I want, I'm going to acquire with money. Because if you want to go back, hadrisu, you're not going to be able to because I've already given you the money. And if I want, I can acquire with the document. That if I want to go back, well, then hadran be. I have the ability to go back because you haven't given me the contract yet. And so that's the detail. So
you went to a really good law school.
Yes, absolutely. So that is number one. Number one was kesef. Now we go to, as a nice transition, because we've been just talking about a contract, just talking about the document, ubishtar. So what about a document? Minolan, how do I know? If you want to say, well, 1 second, let's take a look at the pasuk. Because of b'sefer chasam v'ha'ed edim, right? We said that the pasuk from Yirmiyahu that we cited above references a document. Well, that doesn't work because v'ha'amrat shtaraya ba'alma who we said that reference to a document was only a document for evidence. It wasn't an underlying transferring document. Elamahacha. So rather use the reference to the document in the following verse. This also is from Yirmiyahu. It is also from the 32nd chapter, but this is Pasuk Yud the Ekach, as opposed to the other one, which was Pasuk Mem Dalet. So, okay, and so what do we have? So it says in the Pasuk, the Ekach es Sefer HaMikneh. I'm going to take the document of acquisition. So we have a reference to a document that is making an acquisition. So Amar Shmuel lo shanu ela b'shtar matana. Shmuel says, you know what? This only works. A shtar only works not when you are trying to buy it, but only when you are trying to do it as a gift, b'matana. Aval b'mecher, when it comes to a sale, lo kana ad sheyitin lo damim. You also need the money to change hands. It's not sufficient to just have the contract. So Masiv Rav Hamnuna asked, 1 second, Bishtar Ketzad, we have, so we're going to challenge Shmuel's ruling and say, 1 second, what about the following? We have a brisa that says that that a document, even if it doesn't have the value of a pruta, and we're going to see, let's take a look at what the language is. Bishtar case, how do we use a document to make an acquisition of land? Kasav lo al haniyar o al cheres. You write the contract on a piece of paper or on a piece of pottery. Even though that object is not worth the shavapruta, we're going to say that it's going to make an acquisition. So as a result, the point is that it's not the monetary value that matters. Sadi mechuralach, and I write on that contract, my field is sold to you. Sadi netunalach, or at least at the moment we're going to say that it's an or my field is given to you. Harezu mechura unatuna. The field is either given or sold as applicable. So what do we see? We see that you can sell a field. And this is a brisa which comes before the time that Shmuel ruled, and so Shmuel was teaching, and so as a result, Shmuel has an obligation to follow the brisa. So how is it possible that he's disagreeing with it? So who mosivla? So Rav Hamnuna suggested the challenge. He presented it for whom mefarek law, and he's going to resolve it because what did he say? B'mochas hadeo b'bnei ra'ata. That when maybe we're talking about in that brisa a situation where you're selling the field, because it's a very bad field, and so as a result, why would that make a difference? So let's take a look in Rashi. It's about 15 lines up in the narrow lines. The seller wants the document to be sufficient. He doesn't care about getting the money. he wants to make sure that the buyer can't back out. And so by giving the contract, he wants he wants to make sure that the buyer doesn't have the ability to back out, right? If you bought something, Mark, that you didn't like, you would like to be able to return it, right? But if I give you the contract and I say no takebacks, well, then you're not going to be able to give it back. And so that is what is going on. If the field is a bad field, that's maybe what's going on in this price. And that's why a sale contract, a sale document will be sufficient, even according to Shmuel, even though money has not changed hands. And Rav Ashi offers a second explanation. And what does he say? But Matana Bikesh Lutnola. No, it's talking about where a person wanted to give a gift, Vilama Kasavlo Lashon Mecher, but he wrote both. And why did he write the language of a sale? In order to strengthen the recipient's rights. So I wanted to give Stan a gift of this piece of property. And if I say that I'm giving him this property just as a gift, and then Mark, who I borrowed money from previously, comes and says, you know what, I'm collecting from your property, Stan. I'm sorry, tough luck that you don't get to keep it. Well, if I just gave it to Stan as a gift, well, Stan has no claim against me because I gave it to him as a gift. But if I say that I gave it to you as like a sale, well, then all of a sudden now, yes, Mark will still be able to collect it from you, but you'll be able to come back to me and say, hey, you owe me the money because you had given me this gift as a sale. And so as a result, I am supposed to get it. Now, let's take a look in Rashi. Ravashi Amar, excuse me. Masnisa, this brisa, Benosin Matana Mairi, is really only talking about the giving of a gift. The kulachadahi, and it's all one case. The lav Tani, it's not this or that, right? When we said sadi mechuralach, sadi netunalach, we understood that there was an or between them. But in Hebrew, the letter vav, or even sometimes no letter whatsoever, nothing in between, can constitute an or. But it can also be an and, right? You can have two things in a row that are ands. So elakach vikach kasavlo. I'm writing both languages to you. Sadimachura unatunala. My field is sold to you and given to you. Liyafo de koko, in order to strengthen your hand. She'im yigavenu balcho. If my creditor Mark comes and shall note, my creditor of the giver comes and note mimenu mimena and wants to take from it. So yashuv alav, the recipient of the gift, can return litvoa mimenu to collect to claim from the giver damim hamafurashim, the money that's specified. And so as a result, that is the protection that I'm giving Stan by saying also that it's a sale. Now, Tosfos asks a very good question, because why do we even need to bother mentioning the gift at all? So, and it can't be, now there's a interesting rule that if I sell you a piece of property, Stan, before I'm allowed to sell it to you, I have to go to my neighbors and tell them, listen, I'm going to sell this piece of property for, $1.7 million. If you would like to buy it, you have the right to buy it because you're my neighbor. There's that's the law of Bar Matzra. That the special law that's associated with having fields, because and we're talking about fields in the country, because the point is that it's a lot easier, right, to plow two fields together than two fields that are separated. So as a result, we want to enable the greater valuation that exists when we aggregate the fields together. So, but that doesn't exist if I give you a gift. However, so maybe you might think, okay, well, that's why I wanted to write that it was a gift. But the problem is that if I write it's a gift, but I'm taking responsibility that if Mark comes and takes it from you, I'm going to have to pay up to you. Well, then we no longer treat it as a gift. We treat it as a sale, and you still need to give the bar matzah rights. So as a result, Tosfos offers a few different answers. Answer number one is, you know what? I'm being really tricky because what I'm going to do is I'm going to give Stan two documents. I'm going to give Stan document number one that mentions only the sale and document number two that mentions only the gift. So if Mark comes and collects from Stan, well, then Stan brings me the document that mentions it as a sale, and I have to give him the money. On the other hand, if my next door neighbor, Charlie, comes by and says, listen, Stan, you're not supposed to get that field. I'm supposed to get that field because it was sold to you, and I want and I need to be able to take it, and I want to add it to my field, and I'm willing to pay the purchase price in order to make that happen. Well, then what do you do to Charlie? You show him the document that only references the gift. And so that way, Charlie won't be able to make that claim against you. So that's answer number one. Answer number two is a more simple answer, is that we want to just be honest. I want to tell the truth. I want to say to the world, I am giving a gift to Stan, but I want him to know that I love him so much that he should be able to treat it like it was a sale. And answer number three is, you know what? There are appurtenances, I think that's the right way to pronounce it, to the piece of property. And so let's say there are certain pits or underground storerooms that are in the property. Well, if I have a plain sale to you, Yerushalmi tells us that in fact, that sale does not necessarily include the appurtenances, the field, the pits and underground storerooms that are on the property. I may still want to be able to use those and have them be mine. But if I give it to you as a gift, well, then it's assumed that I'm giving you the gift with an open hand, with a sense of generosity, what's known as an ayin yafa. And as a result, we're going to assume that that was included in my gift. So that's the deal with the story of a document. And now we're ready to go to chazaka. Uva chazaka. Okay, so what about chazaka? How do I know that that works? Minalan, Amar Chizkiya, Amar Kra, Ushvu ba'arehen asher tafastem. That you should live in the cities in which you've seized. So the seizing suggests some kind of chazaka. So b'ma tafastem. How have you seized them? Yeshiva, well, through dwelling there, that's how you seize them, and so as a result, that's the pasuk that we want to cite, and that's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. Again, this is now Parak Mem pasuk Yud, and then Rabbi Yishmael Tana. However, the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael taught the following: V'rishtem eosav yishavtem ba. No, take a look at the beginning of Sefer Dvarim, and it says that you're going to inherit it and you're going to live in it. So, B'ma Yarashtem, how do you inherit? B'yeshiva, by dwelling there. So the point is you take possession of something through living there. And so that is the answer, and we've now gone through the three mechanisms of acquisition for real property. How about movable property? How do I know? Minalan. How do I know that the way you acquire it is by Mashicha? So the pasuk says, this is in Vayikra Parakav Hey, that when you sell to your fellow, or you acquire from the hand of your fellow. So what's the acquisition? The method of acquisition is davar hanikna miyad liyad. When you acquire something that's metaltalin, that it can be passed from hand to hand, it is the passing of it from hand to hand that constitutes the acquisition. Rabbi Yochanan de Amar Dvar Torah Mos Konos. Well, 1 second. What about Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan says that, you know what? And this is, again, I referenced this at the very beginning when we were looking at the Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan says that the method of acquisition involves money, according to the Torah. And it's only the rabbis who said, you know what? We don't want money to be the mechanism of acquisition. And we'll get to why in a moment. But he says that it's not going to make an acquisition. So ma'ikal amemar, what do we cite then? Meaning, how do you explain the fact that our Mishnah chose to refer to the method of acquisition that is only rabbinic, as opposed to the biblical one? Well, Tana Takanta de Rabbanan Katani. No, well, we specifically wanted to teach the one that was rabbinic, meaning we again in the Gemara in Baba Metzia, we're going to establish that the rabbis made a takana that every acquisition needs the mashicha, needs the possession of the object itself when it comes to metaltalin to change hands, and so therefore that's why we are teaching it. And take a look, Rashi, first of the widest lines at the bottom. Amar Lacha, Masnisin, our Mishnah, lo tikshali. Don't ask me about it. The Rabbana Katani, because we're just learning the rabbinic rule. That's the rabbinic establishment. That's what they established. So Tana, the Masnisin akru chachamim kinyan hamos, because the rabbis uprooted the concept of a monetary acquisition. Why? Very important. V'amru lo takana ela mashicha, and therefore they said, no, you have to use mashicha. You have to use some kind of taking possession of the underlying object, because gzeira shema yomer lo nisrafu chetecha ba'aliyah. Your wheat burned in my attic. Because what happens? I sell you some wheat. The wheat is in my attic. You give me the money, and now you own the wheat. You come to me the next day and say, David, where's my wheat? I say, listen, Stan, I'm really sorry, but the wheat burned up. It doesn't exist any longer. And you're like, what are you talking about? I didn't even know that there was a fire. And I say, yeah, prove to me that there wasn't a fire. Prove to me that I'm still holding that wheat. Well, we recognize that that is a situation that is really ripe for a lot of arguments and really lots of bad will and potential violence. So the rabbi said, no, listen, every acquisition is not final until the buyer does the mashicha. And so as a result, when you take, if that were to happen, and I were to say, you gave me the money, and I say, listen, Stan, I'm sorry, the wheat burned. You say, I didn't do mashicha. It's not in my possession. That's on you, David, that the wheat burned. So give me back my money. Well, now, all according to the rabbis, I have to give you back your money because it was on me that the wheat burned. And so if the wheat didn't burn, I will actually bring it out and give you your wheat. Okay. So in any event, so that is the story with respect to the sale of movable property with Mashiach. Now we come to the next category, so that we say that nechasim she'ein lahem akrayas has the ability of being acquired with property sheyesh lahen akrayas, with real property. So menani mili, how do I know that you can buy a movable property with real property? So Amar Kra vayiten lahem aviyem natanot. And then the pasuk continues later, im arei mitzuro bihuda, that the father, this is all the way at the end of Tanakh in Divrei Hayamim Bet, and it says, Parak Kaf Aleph Pasuk Gimel, that the father gave them gifts and then gave the gifts together with fortified cities. So we see a transfer both of real property along with movable property. So that shows that you can transfer one with the other. And now we're going to get to the key question that we will not, unfortunately, be able to answer today, but we will offer 3 efforts to answer that question today. And that is the following. Do we need everything to be piled? So what in the world does that mean? So let's take a look at Rashi. Tziburin bo, do we need everything piled on it? Olo. I should read the next words in the Gemara, or not. And so what's the question? Sheyahu. Oh, so now again, 4th line from the bottom of Rashi. Sheyahu otan metaltalin munachin ba'oto karka. Do we need the metaltalin, the movable property, to be resting on the real property that is being sold with it, that is used being the mechanism for the acquisition? Because do we say that it is effectively the property that's making the acquisition, or is it the acquisition that's making the acquisition, and we're just going to allow you to include more? So we're going to make 5 different efforts. Only the last one will be successful. And for those who can't, who have a sense of, don't like the suspense, we'll get to, I'll tell you the answer today, but in order to see the details, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow. So Amar Rabbi Yosef, Tashma, effort number one, Rabbi Akiva, Omer, Karka, Kol Shehu, you have land of any size, Chayeves bepeya ubikurim. It's subject to the laws of peya and bikurim. V'lechtov aleha prosbol, and it's sufficient in order for the lender to write a prosbol over it. V'liktos ima nechasim she'ein lehem achrayas, and it's enough for you to acquire movable property with it. So what do we see? We see it can be any size. That's even very small. And if you're telling me that everything needs to be piled on the land, what's it fit for? What can you buy with it? So Targuma Rav Shmuel Bar Bisna, Kamei Rav Yosef. So Rav Shmuel Bar Bisna suggests the following: you stuck a needle in it, meaning you can acquire. There's always something as small as the land. You can acquire a needle with it. So Amrle Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef said back to him, 1 second. Kavastem, you're being annoying. Iqbal Tana and Macha. You're going to tell me that Tana went out of his way to teach all this detail in order to acquire a needle? So Rav Ashi defends and says, Amar Rav Ashi, Man lemolan de lo talaba marganisa deshavya alpha zuze. Maybe it's got a gem from it, a pearl hanging from it that's worth 1,000 zuz. So the bottom line is that is not a successful proof. We tried to prove that you don't need the property on the land, but we were unsuccessful. Effort number 2, Tashma, Amr Abelazar, Masav Madoni, Echad Shahaya Yerushalayim. There was a certain guy from Madon who was in Yerushalayim, Shahayulam Metaltal and Harbe. He had a lot of property, a lot of movable property. Uvikesh Litnam Bimbatana, and he wanted to give it as a present, Amrulo, and they told him, Ain lo takana. There's no way to fix it. Achi yaknem al gabi karka. You got to transfer it with land. So, and we're going to see what does it mean. Ain lo takana. Why couldn't he just use chalifin or some other mechanism to transfer it? So, achi yaknem al gabi karka. You need to put it with some land. So, ma'asa. What did he do? Halach v'lakach beis sela samach liYerushalayim. He bought a sela's worth of land in Yerushalayim, a base sela of land. And what do we assume that the base sela means at the moment? Either that it's worth a sela or that it's the size of a sela, but the sela is a coin, so it's very, very small. So clearly you couldn't actually transfer any significant amounts of of movable property with it. And he bought it near Yerushalayim. This little piece should go to this other person. The emo, and with that piece of land, may its own 100 sheep, may a chavios, 100 kegs of wine, umes, and then he died. The kimu is dvarav, and we said that his words were accepted, meaning that the transfer was a valid transfer. The amr be'inin siburin ba. Now, if you tell me that 100 sheep and 100 kegs needed to be piled up on the land, how could that possibly be the case? It's such a small piece of land. So misvara beisela sela mamish. You thought that when we said a beisela meant that it was either worth a sela or the size of a sela. No, my sela also can mean a rock, and denafish tuva, and we're talking about a large piece of paste. The amai karule sela. Why was it called sela? To kashuk to sela because it was hard like a rock, and so as a result, we have not. We've tried again to prove that you don't need to put the property on the. You don't need to put the movable property on the real property, but we were unsuccessful. Effort number 3, Tashma, the Amr of Yehuda Amar Rav. Now we're going to have the same basic story that Rav, but it's the version that Rav heard. There was a sick person in Yerushalayim, Rabbi Eliezer, and this is according to the Rabbi Eliezer. The Amri La. And again, the Rabbi Elazar was the one who taught in the Brisa. So you can see that there's some kind of connection between effort number 2 and effort number 3, that it seems to be talking about the same story, different version. But Amrila Barihu Haya, and some people say he was healthy, Kirabanan, and that's the version according to the rabbis. Shahayu lo metaltal in Harbe, because he had a lot of movable property. And by the way, the health of the person is because depending on whether you hold like Rabbi Eliezer or like the rabbis, is the question of whether or not any kind of kinyan is necessary. According to Rabbi Eliezer, even a sick person can only transfer property with a real kinyan, but according to the rabbis, you do not. According to the rabbis, though, if you're in good health, you do need a valid kinyan. So the bottom line is we're going to set this up as a situation where you need a real kinyan. Shahayulo metaltal and harbe, and the guy had a lot of property, a lot of movable property. Ubikesh litanam mipantana, and he wanted to give it all as a gift. Amrulo, and so they said to him, "Ein lo takun." There's no other way to do it. Ad shiaknim al gabi karka. You have to put it all on a piece of land. Me'asa, what did he do? Halach v'lakak beis rova samach Yerushalayim. He bought a beis rova near Yerushalayim. V'amar. And what did he say? Tefach al tefach leploni. He gave the guy only a tefach of the land. That's very small. The imo meya zon umeya chabios. And again, he gave it with 100 sheep and 100 kegs. Umes v'kimu chachamim esdvarv. And then he died. And this rabbi said that that the acquisition was a valid acquisition. The transaction was good. The iyamar be'inin tziburin. And if you tell me that we need to pile everything up, tefach al tefach l'may chazi. You can't put even one sheep on a tefach al tefach piece of land. And you're going to put 100 sheep and also 100 kegs of wine? Not possible. So here's what we're talking about. Lidemei. Maybe we're talking about where the money was put on that piece of property. Well, and maybe in fact this makes some sense. Because if you tell me that it was 100 sheep and 100 kegs, why not do an acquisition of chalifin? Meaning, why do an acquisition that actually involves real property at all? I can just, if Stan gives me something, I lift it up, I can transfer a lot of property to whomever I want just via that mechanism, and to Stan via that mechanism. So elam amai ledemei. So it must be that it was talking about coins, because coins cannot be transferred via chalifin. So as a result, well, one second, if you tell me that it's coins, well, why not have the recipient just drag the coins? That's not very hard to do. So must be ela delese lemakabel matana. The person who was supposed to get the gift wasn't there. So now, well, once you say that, well, then the chalifin doesn't work either. So that's why it's not possible. So now we understand why was it not possible to do any kind of transaction? It was not possible because the recipient wasn't there. Well, the Gemara now asks, well, one second, but let him make the acquisition through an agent. Somebody else can serve as the person's agent. So lo samcha daite. So the giver did not feel that any of those people who were in the area could be reliable. Savar shamit va'akalahu. He was worried that the person might take some and eat it. The elamai ein lo takana. So as a result, what does it mean ein lo takana? It's not that there was no potential mechanism. There were potential mechanisms, but hakikamar lemai delo samcha daita ein lo takana. There was no way to get around the fact that there wasn't somebody there that would be reliable. Ad sheyaknem al gabi karka. So the only way that the donor could give the gift was with a piece of property. Now, how does that solve the problem? It solves the problem because now all real estate transactions are considered very public. And so as a result, when you put the property on the real estate, everybody will now know that this small amount of real estate was given to this person. And so the person will hear about it and he will be able to know that he got all this stuff associated with it. So the bottom line is that we're still stuck. We don't know whether or not you need to pile all the property up on all the movable property up on the real property in order to transfer the real property with the movable property. So we've done with 3 efforts. So for the 4th effort, along with the 5th and final effort, you're going to need to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf so that you can learn whether movable property must rest on the land in order to be transferred with that land. And now I'll give you the spoiler. If you want to, you can shut down if you want to. If you don't want to hear the spoiler is the Gemara is going to answer that the movable property does not need to be on the land. And with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, and you'll hear why and how we prove that, God willing, tomorrow. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Be well.
Shani should be in going to this.
Yes, you're absolutely right. She's
Yeah,
a
because
real estate lawyer.
she deals with some of this.
Exactly. But I'll bring her into the conversation.
Yeah, well,
All
you know,
right.
the movable property being conveyed along with the real estate, that's actually something that varies depending where you are in the United States. In some places, major appliances, it's assumed that they stay with the house, but in other places, you move your washing machine with you when you move from one house to the other.
Yep. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Yeah,
We
I don't know
actually,
about other countries.
yep. I'm sure it varies by country as well.
Yeah,
Have a
all the
great day.
best.
Have a good Shabbos. Bye bye.